Welcome to Equine Assisted World. I'm your host, Rupert Isaacson, New York Times best-selling author of The Horse Boy, founder of New Trails Learning Systems and LongRideHome.com. You can find details of all our programs and shows on rupertisaacson.com. Here on Equine Assisted World, we look at the cutting edge and the best practices currently being developed and established in the equine assisted field. This can be psychological, this can be psych, this can be physical, this can be all of the conditions that human beings have that these lovely equines, these beautiful horses that we work with, help us with. Thank you for being part of the adventure, and we hope you enjoy today's show. Welcome to Equine Assisted World. I've got Christine Dickson with me today. If you don't know her, you soon will, and you should. She is based out of Los Angeles. She is an equine assisted coach, but she's much, much more than that. And I'm going to let her talk a little bit about the modalities that she uses and how she uses them, specifically with trauma and addiction. And for those of us who are working broader and broader in the field, like us at Horse Boy and New Trails, where we got into it with autism and then naturally found this broadening out into all sorts of areas of, mental health, we realize at certain points that we need mentors. And I was at the Warwick Schiller's Journey On Summit in Birmingham in England this year. And I'd met Christine before in California, but she was there speaking again. And this is the first time I'd really had a chance to properly listen to her. And she shared in more depth about her work. And so I thought I would try it out. Thought, this sounds really good. I'm going to try this thing that she does and see if it works on some of my own, difficult histories and stories and little traumas that are going around within me. And she did her thing and it worked. Interesting. And it worked in a way that usually I'm used to seeing when I'm engaging in the shamanic world. And normally I don't bring that side into equine assisted world because it's a can of worms. However, there are things that cross over in human consciousness in society, but also have good hard science behind them. So without rambling too much more, I'm going to let Christine introduce herself and advocate for her own awesomeness and share with us some things that really will inform us making our practices better. Okay. So Christine, welcome to Equine Assisted World. Thank you for coming on. Please tell us who you are and what you do.
Well, first, I'm really excited to be here because, yes, we did connect in a deeper way at the Birmingham Summit because we kind of were in this orbit of each other the other two times, but this time we really talked, and we've just had a lot of deep conversations that have been really fun. So I'm excited to be here and have another one with you. So these days I refer to myself as a transformational mentor because I'm trained in a few modalities that they all kind of work together beautifully. I got trained as a clinical hypnotherapist in 2004. I've been trained as an advanced practitioner of IEMT, which is integral eye movement technique. And I have been doing equine assisted coaching for about 5-6 years now. So all of those things, as well as mentoring and coaching people, they all work really well together and build on each other. And the people that I think that I most attract and work with, or, it's funny, they say you typically work with people who are similar in what their experiences are, right? So I tend to work with people who have either grown up in families where they had one or both caregivers, whether that was a parent or grandparent, had mental health issues such as pathological personality disorders or addiction, because the two things show up in much the same way. You have an emotionally and compassionate level person who is dysregulated. So their compassion for others is greatly reduced. And that makes for a very unhealthy environment for a child, because the child then really early on learns that to adapt and survive in this environment, I'm going to have to be able to read the room. I'm going to have to be able to read the nervous system and thoughts of the person who's bigger than me and in charge. And that becomes a hypervigilance. It becomes this kind of almost superpower where you can even tell by maybe the way the footsteps are coming down the hallway of whether this is going to be a good night or a bad night. And that is so linked, that kind of sensory projection and hypervigilance is really correlated with high levels of empathy. So we develop these high levels of connection and empathy and reading people. The downside to that is that what we don't cultivate is our own sense of self. We don't cultivate how we feel in any given situation. Like, does that make me feel good or bad? Or do I like this or dislike it? Because we're always reading the room and figuring out what other people are sensing and feeling there, and then adapting to them in order, again, to be safe. And so this creates a pattern where we only feel safe in how other people are perceiving us. And many times we grow up to take that pattern out into the world and find ourselves in constantly similar situations because that's where our skill set is. And even though we don't want to be in those situations, to the 88% that is our subconscious mind, what is familiar is pleasurable.
Can you just repeat that? Say that again.
So to the subconscious, we call them, in hypnotherapy, they're called knowns. These are what we know, right? To the subconscious, knowns, which to the conscious mind could be abuse or negative, but to the subconscious, knowns are pleasurable because we know how this works. We've been here before. It's like the devil you know. So you could grow up in a very dysregulated, unhealthy, chaotic, abusive environment, and your conscious mind could dream about when you grow up and you can't wait to get away from all of this, and you dream about this healthy life that you want to live. But what's funny, or it's not funny at all, what is interesting, let's say, is that the subconscious goes, hey, that's a great idea. That looks cool. But guess what? We've never experienced that. And because it's the unknown, it's to be feared. We're going to make you attracted to people and situations that will repeat the patterns of your childhood, because you know what? You know how to do that. So then we end up in relationships, like romantic relationships, with people that could most of the time appear that they're absolutely not that. And then once we get further down the road, we realize, oh my gosh, this is the same pattern. And then we go through the trauma of being in a relationship as an adult with someone who's either battling addiction or has these same pathological personality disorders. Or what can be really, really heavy is that we are so broken down spiritually, emotionally, that in our these create cognitive dissonance, meaning like we no longer know what's real and what's not, what's true and what's not, because we're constantly being blamed, projected, lied to, all of these things. So instead of trying to clear and face it, we take ourselves out, and people will take themselves down by then using drugs and alcohol to check out, when actually facing and leaving the situation feels unbearable. And that the worst part about that is that we've now become more and more vulnerable in the relationship, because that addiction will be used against us to keep us in that cage and keep us in that box.
Addiction's an interesting thing because we tend to think of it as addiction to a substance or a behavior. But I think that what you're talking about here is that what we seem to be really addicted to is certain types of relationship, as you say, because what's familiar, we feel we know how to handle it. So even if it's essentially unsafe, it's a danger that we know how to navigate.
I would say, I don't want to cut you up, I just want to make one clarification. I wouldn't call it an addiction.
Okay.
And the reason I wouldn't call it an addiction is because there's a conscious aspect to addiction. You know when you're picking up a bottle of alcohol, right? You know when you're picking up a drug. You may feel powerless to it, but you know you're doing it. We're talking about an unconscious program that exists in your mind, that even though consciously you think you're making good choices and not choosing it, you don't see the red flags because your tolerance level of those red flags has been trained to be so high that you just don't see it until it gets to this point where suddenly it's now crossed into the level from the subconscious into the conscious, and you see what's now happening, and then it all becomes clear. But it's not that choice of addiction.
Okay.
Right.
So if people are listening to this and they're saying, well, okay, but I'm running an equine assisted thing, why do I need to know this? Or I can see why I need to know this, but I've got people showing up, might be going through something like this. How on earth do I help them? I want to talk about your work prior to horses first, because, we horse people, we're very kind of, oh, well, you've been in this for 5 to 7 years. Well, I've been in it for, 5,000 years. Blah, 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 blah. So people like me, for example, I'll play devil's advocate, grew up in horse culture, no horses, never didn't know horses, even though my parents actually were not horsey, but I had a horsey aunt. So I was, steeped in it. And it's been my life, my whole life. Even when I've done other careers, it's always been parallels. There's never been a time when I wasn't sort of a professional, because I came at it not from the big money side. So you then had to become a pro, basically. First in the sports side, the training side, and then latterly in the therapeutic side or whatever. Okay, fine. So horse people naturally have a bit of an allergy when someone comes in and says, well, I've been doing this quite recently, because we know that can also sometimes actually lead to some, bad judgments. This is true.
Sure.
So I want first for you to talk to us about your life with these types of treatments, modalities prior to horses. Then how did you get into them with horses? And then what can old timers like me, equine dinosaurs, learn from some stuff that you can bring in from completely outside of that world and then apply to horses that I could have mentorship for when someone like this shows up in my practice. So can you talk us back to where you began? How do you know about all this stuff?
So firstly, anybody that kind of knows me or has worked with me, I really don't push myself as a horse expert or even an equine coaching expert in this. What I know is that what has worked for me, but nobody has to listen to me at all. I'm just going to share what my experiences have been. And again, super humble in this area. Like, I would never put myself in the position of saying that I'm an expert in this, but I can share what my experience has been. So what's funny is this whole life journey began with the idea of doing equine assisted coaching. Well, that's not necessarily true. It began with hypnotherapy. I really, really wanted to be a therapist. That's what I wanted to be. And when I moved from Vancouver, BC down to Los Angeles, and I was in a really dysfunctional relationship and, very living like paycheck to paycheck, I was still raising my kids. I had never gone to college, right? So going back to school meant that I was going to be in school for a very, very, very long time before I would be licensed to be able to see clients. And I just didn't see how I was going to be able to do that because I needed to get out of this relationship and I needed something that I could make money at and support my children. And I wanted to really do something that was going to help people. So I saw an ad for, it was the only college in the country of hypnotherapy, and it was in Los Angeles. And it was a 1.5-year program, and it had a residency, and it was very on the up and up. So I signed up for that because that would mean that within 2 years, I could actually be doing this. And that changed my whole view of what I wanted to do because I loved that modality so much because it was addressing that 88%, which is the subconscious program. And I had felt like I found my thing. I found the thing that I love doing. I love seeing the results of this. But I was still in the middle of my own dysfunctional relationship. And one of the markers that makes a person more likely to be in a pathological relationship, or I should say a cluster of markers, is one is a high, high level of tolerance, a high, high level of empathy, really strong level of loyalty to a fault, like you give loyalty to someone who does not give it back. And those a combination of those things and that your relationships mean the world to you, and having those markers, those traits meant that I would always put everything before myself. So even though I got trained in this, even though I was so excited, even though I graduated, I was starting to get clients. At the time, my ex-husband was starting his construction business and convinced me that if I gave all that up and I became the operations manager and ran that company for him, for us, it would make way more money than my hypnotherapy. And therefore, we could build this up and it was like, do this for a year or two, and then you can go do your little hypnotherapy thing, and you wouldn't have to worry about money and blah, blah, blah. Well, I'm sure you can imagine how that went. I was doing that for 5 years as our relationship disintegrated. It was hell. But I was doing it for this carrot. There was the carrot. And I just kept looking at that carrot, going against everything that was my intuition was telling me, my soul was telling me. And guess what? 2008 happened and everything was lost. 5 years I did that job, and it was everything that had been built up was taken away in the recession. We lost everything. And I went through a period where I told myself that this was punishment, that the universe was punishing me for being greedy because look, I wanted this really abundant life that I could give stuff to my children and help my children and all this. And I was just being greedy. You should just be happy with the fact that you have somewhere to live and you have food. And it was really hard. Like I was really depressed, and I had to slowly figure out who I was, because I had given everything to this relationship and this company and all of this, and it all was not in alignment with who I was. It was not in integrity. And now I didn't know who I was. And I read at that point in time, I read The Artist's Way. And in The Artist's Way, it talks about journaling while you're writing morning pages and having one day a week that was your play day. And when I was thinking about play, of course, play kind of goes back to your childhood. So I started using my childhood as kind of fertile ground to try and remember who I was and try to rebuild myself. And I would go to museums because they were free, and I was so broke. I mean, this was in the middle of the recession. I was so broke. I was baking bread at home. I was very, very financially tapped. So yeah, this was a slow process, building myself back up again.
Where do the horses come into this?
So when things were really bad, I would go to barns. I would find public barns. I didn't know, like I always loved horses, but I don't know, I didn't understand why when it was.
Was that going back to childhood? Was that the little girl who actually did horses?
Yes. And I would go to the barns, and I would just walk up and down the breezeway and feel better and feel this calming unraveling in my chest and feel like I could breathe just being there.
With the horses' heads looking over the boxes, sort of.
That's it. Maybe I'd pet some noses a little bit, but like I was.
And had you been exposed to horses at all as a kid?
Yes, but not a lot. Like I was a horse crazy girl that never did get a horse. My grandmother, they couldn't afford to have a horse for me. So they would take me to sometimes a riding barn where you could, I got sent to a horseback riding camp one summer for 2 weeks. That was borderline traumatic. Yeah. I always gravitated towards horses always. So I had experiences, but I never really had experiences. So that led me to in 2007, I read The Tao of Equus by Linda Kahanov. And it was like I suddenly understood why I was attracted to horses at my darkest moments.
By the way, for listeners, if you don't know who she is, go to our Live Free, Ride Free podcast and check out the interview with Linda Kahanov there. It's really good. Okay, sorry, back to you, Christine.
Well, she reading that was like, oh my God, I want to do this.
Why? What did the book say to you that?
Because I've always been so connected to animals. I've always felt like a deep connection to animals, and especially horses. But I didn't have a lot of experience with horses, and I loved helping people. I loved learning too. I love learning about why we do the things we do, or how can we heal? How can we go from suffering and surviving into being a healthy and liberated, thriving human, and not just someone who now has, I healed that pain, but I'm still kind of in the shadows. So I saw that I could marry my love for horses and my deep desire to learn, because I didn't know anything about this. I mean, how fun to learn this. and to get that wisdom and then to practice something that is just like magical. And there's an aspect of it that it's not clinical, right? Like you're partnering with a horse. So you have no idea what's going to happen. There's a newness to it and a trust in it and a spiritual sense that I was very attracted to. So that went on my vision board in 2007. That went on my vision board. And I always joke about it because what's funny is that when I finally got to a place where that was possible, because that was the gasoline in my tank. Like it was always going to be, I even ran the Equine Assisted program at the addiction facility I worked at in Malibu, partnering with, there was a therapist and the horse handler came in, and then I was the one that ran the equine program. I brought the people to it. I participated in it, and it was my job to write the clinical notes for what took place. And
this is sometime after 2008, right?
Yeah, this is in 18 to,
Okay.
yeah, for about 2 years. But that was the gas in my gas tank. That was on my vision board. But when I finally got to the place where I could do that, really do that, was the end of 2020 when I moved into my own ranch and had everything. And I remember sitting on a chair, looking out at my horses and having this breath and going, wow, I'm finally here. I can finally do it. And then just having this realization that that's not it. Like it's a part of it for sure. But the vision of me just doing that, like everything else falling away, and like that was it. It wasn't it. But it was a really key piece. And the horses brought me here 1,000%. And I've had amazing experiences with them, with clients.
Tell us about your current equestrian practice, and then I want to go right back to the beginning. Where you're born, how you arrive at knowing about these sorts of relationships, why hypnotherapy, and then why from hypnotherapy to some of the other modalities that you do, which I think will be useful for our listeners. And then we're going to catch up again back to the present. So tell us, just starting now, tell us about your equestrian practice right now. What is it? What do you do?
So when people seem a bit stuck, I love partnering with the horses because people will be more genuine and have access. I mean, they're not trying to not be genuine, no one's trying, but a lot of times our trauma is based in other people, to be fair. So accessing trust, developing trust with someone takes time, but trust in an animal can be immediate.
Okay.
So taking somebody out, let's say like one of the things that I've done that has been really beneficial has been going out. So I'll take a couple horses and I'll invite them to come into the arena. And then I will close the arena. I'll put all kinds of toys and things out there for them to interact with. And then the client and I will sit outside the arena. And I give them a pad and paper. And I won't tell them the names of any horses or any information about any horses. And I ask them for about 15, 20 minutes to just observe the horses. And then I wanted them to write a little bio about each horse, like how they interpret that horse, what they see, and what they feel that horse's personality is, all of this stuff. It's amazing because people will project so much onto the horses. But by doing that, by taking it outside of their themselves, where they're feeling all the feelings and putting them outside of their body onto these horses, they gain clarity and perspective around what's actually going on in their life or how they're viewing things in their life.
And then maybe the fact that they actually do project.
Exactly. That's my mother-in-law. That's my old boss. That one thing, that one just bosses everybody around, right? Where anybody that knows horses would say that one's just playing, right?
Mm.
Just got a playful spirit. That one's a bully, right? And it can be also projecting parts of themselves, right? I had one person who was really attracted to my mule, who is like a Zen Buddha. He loves people. He's low man on the totem pole, though. I have another horse that is very confident, swagger. He's the class clown. And this person was saying that he really felt a deep connection to my mule, but he wanted to be the confident horse. And he had this almost disgust towards the mule because he was low on the totem pole. He was a very empathetic and non-confrontational being. And this was a manifestation of how he saw himself as a man, because he was that loving, empathetic, healing man in a world that values the swagger and the confidence, and felt like that was what he needed to cultivate, and really had some self-loathing around that he wasn't that.
When you point out to someone, you say, well, that horse is being a bully, and you say, well, actually, they're just playing. At some point, you point that out, perhaps. Do those people then get a realization, oh, shit, I'm projecting? Fuck, I kind of do this in my day-to-day life. Oh.
Absolutely.
Do they get that clarity?
Yes.
Okay, that's so interesting, because I think that clarity is almost impossible to get human to human, because we'll die on the hill of our ego, right? And we'll do that because our ego is convinced that that's what is necessary for survival, that we come by it honestly, otherwise we wouldn't all do it. It surprises me, frankly, to hear that if you were to point that out, that someone would accept, oh gosh, I guess I do project, because then that's you, a human, pointing it out. So therefore, you're now the adversary and the human. How do you dance that dance?
Well, you certainly don't blurt it out, right? You don't hit them over the head with it. I want to delve deep into first what it is they're seeing, and let them use their own tools to kind of like really flesh it out. And then I ask questions, I will ask them do you want me to tell you the way that these horses present here? Not like this is the right answer and that's the wrong answer, but do you want me to tell you how they are seen here at the ranch? Right. So this guy, he's seen as a clown, right? He's always looking for play, and he's confident, and he doesn't have all the anxiety that some of the horses who have had other experiences with humans can have. He's healthier mentally, and I have yet to meet somebody that isn't fascinated and excited about looking at the differences between their perception and another perception of what you're seeing.
And the people that are coming, I know you work a lot with addiction. Is that frequently what's brought them through the ranch gate? Or is it less that now? Is it more other things?
It's less the addiction now. It's more the the people who have experienced the other side, which is the person who has lived with the addict or the person who has lived with the person with a pathological personality disorder or grown up with them or chose them as partners, because there's a lot of healing that needs to happen, a lot of subconscious programming and there's I think that there's an aspect that, how do I say this? So there's been a lot of emphasis on helping the person who has low self-esteem and a low power level, or how you want to describe it, in relationship, the person on that's more needs to be brought up. There, that's been like so much the focus of self-help books and things, is the person who needs to be brought up, but not a lot of talk about the grandiosity and the grandiose that need to be brought down. And many times when you're bringing someone up, that's not something that that person's used to, so they don't have a feel for it. And when they're trying to, quote unquote, fight for themselves or set boundaries or do these things, they, without a lot of guidance, they can be not very good at that. And then they can overcompensate, and then they can start to become the bully, using their pain as justification. But that's not what they want to do. It's just that they don't have the framework to be able to have balance and have a true place of grounding to come from, and not feel like everything is a power fight.
Got it.
Like,
Are you using a particular set of modalities in the equine? I know you are in the non-equine. I keep promising to go back to these. We're going to. Are you using something like Igala natural lifemanship? But are you sort of going with your gut here, based on the work that you did pre-equine, if you like, now brought to equine? What is that more describing what you're doing?
yes, it's more of partnering with the horse and allowing and just really kind of setting things up. I just have a different view, not a different view, because a lot of people have the same view. My view is that the horses have a ton of wisdom, that I don't really have to have a lot of technical framework for them to be able to do what they do. I've taken a ton of workshops, read a ton of books, had, a few years of active work in this kind of on the job training. They did do something similar to like an Igala, where the idea was, you bring the group in, you divide the people up into groups. You've got 4 loose horses in the arena. We have set up a thing in the middle, a circle. You've got to get that horse in the circle without, how do you do it? That was kind of, so it was kind of teaching people how to work as teams and stuff like that. But it wasn't always utilizing, in that scenario, the wisdom of the horses and allowing the horses to be as involved in the process. And what I found is, in the way that I partner with them, they don't need a lot of direction.
They being the client?
Meaning the horses.
Okay.
I just, and I do have to have a framework to set things up, obviously, and I have to have an idea of what I'm trying to get, but I don't know what is going to happen. You asked me a question about how people then have these moments of realizing that they're projecting. And I had a woman come out, really, really, I really liked her. She's really cool. And she wanted to work with the horses with me. And she was very intuitive, very smart. And I just, you have to kind of, I think if you have too much, if I have too much of I want to do these things, right? A framework, then I'm not going to be as in the moment to sense and follow my intuition about what the next step should be, because I'm going to have my checklist that I got to get done. And we started off with the whole in the arena, writing about what you think about each horse. And she was really spot on. She was very good at that. And then we ended with, I had her go into a 24 by 24 like little paddock stall with my mule and a brush. And I just said, just try this. I want you to brush him, but I want you to be in connection with him. I want you to be telling him about what you're doing and talk to him. Talk to him as though he can understand you, and you can share with him anything you're thinking or feeling, anything that you want him to get out of this. And I just left her there, and I went far enough away where she knew I couldn't hear anything, but that I could still kind of see what was happening. And she did that for like 15, 20 minutes. And then that ended, and we came back into my office, and she seemed like she was smiling, like she was happy. And so we talked about a few things, and then I asked her at the end, what is your biggest takeaway from today? And what she said, like, just blew me away, because I wasn't expecting it. She hadn't shared any of this. And she said, I've been in therapy for 30 years. And for 30 years, I've had therapists telling me that I take everything personally, and that I have to stop, the idea is to stop trying to see myself through other people's eyes. I'm always worried about what other people think of me. Everything I do is to create this image, and then I'm devastated if I think somebody thinks poorly of me. And they're like, just be in your body, be in you. And she said that having that time with him and observing him that day and talking to him about this, is that what she realized is that even though he was low man on the totem pole, he didn't care, because he was fully being himself. And that was who he was. And there was nothing right or wrong about it. It was right because that was him being fully himself. And he did not care. He had no awareness at all. He was happy. And she finally understood what those therapists were trying to say to her, because she saw it exemplified in him. And it's like all of that teaching just finally all lined up inside her psyche, and she got it.
It's very interesting. I was having a rather similar conversation with someone today. We were working with my herd and working on classical dressage stuff. But as you probably know, we do that with a view to creating horses that can also work with people to make them feel better. And this person correctly pointed out that the horse that had been the most fiery under saddle, in a good way, was low on the totem pole. And I said, it's true, but he didn't used to be. He used to be top dog, and he took a back seat 18 months ago. And that was who he was then. But there was a certain amount of stress involved in that for him. He had to kind of be in control, because to be top dog is actually not just about getting the food first. It's about, you're supposed to be vigilant. You're the one who has to make sure all the other horses are okay, basically. And now he's stepped down from that role. There's younger horses come into that role. And as you say, he doesn't care. there's no sense of despair that, oh my God, I used to be the top dog and now I'm, not. And under saddle, he's just like the same old, hey, hey, hey. And then when he gets in the field or in the pen, he's like, yeah, I'm here. It's fine. And would that we could now looked at it myself and kind of went, gosh, that's beyond wisdom. That's happiness, because that's just to be okay where you are. We could wish for such peace. It's peaceful, I think. Okay. You came to horses late-ish. And again, I keep promising listeners, please hang with me, because we are going to go into Christine's story of how she got here, which you kind of need to hear. But when you come into horses late-ish, you've got to have mentors, right? So even though, I'm always, when people say, oh, Ru, why should I learn from you? And say, well, because actually I've got good mentors. So if you're learning from me, you're actually learning from, this person and this person and this person. So say it's in the dressage thing, then that would be the Valenza family in Portugal, who I know you've gone out to visit and seen the amazing stuff they do and blah, blah, blah. Who are your mentors? Who brought you to your horse knowledge that you can offer your horses to people, your herd to people?
As I said, I started reading the Tao of Equus. I just devoured everything.
Right, but that doesn't tell you how to keep horses. That tells you
No, it doesn't.
what you'd like to do with horses, but that doesn't tell you how. Right, yeah.
So is that what you're asking about? How?
But yeah, like, how did you learn your horse skills?
Oh, yeah. Okay. So it's kind of a funny story. Okay. So before everything for me really took off, I had read a book called You Are a Badass by Jen Sincero. And what's funny is that my ego at the time, because I had read all of these books, I was the self-help master, and all of the really heady ones, all the Eckhart Tolle's and the Gary Zukov, Seed of Soul, and all these very deep books. And then here's this book, You Are a Badass by Jen Sincero, that I'm listening to on Audible. And she's such a dork. She so has, and self-proclaimed, like, she has these jokes that are like dad jokes through it. Everything she's talking about are things like, I already know that. I remember being so like arrogant in the beginning of listening to this book. I was like, this is like self-help 101 for people, I already know this stuff. So silly. The thing about it being delivered in such a fun, silly, which you might identify with, lighthearted, huh? Not you, yeah, not at all.
Yeah, bossy. Yeah.
Right. Fun, silly, lighthearted, jokey, dorky way. It made it accessible to me. Suddenly, this was something I wasn't just like intellectually pondering and from this existential place. This was someone that was showing how she did these things and took in these teachings and applied them to her life in a really clumsy and not perfect way. And it just made it accessible to me. So listening to that book, in the middle of listening to that book, it's all about taking action. What action are you taking? I want to work with horses, but I don't have the money. I don't have any horses. I don't have any access to horses. What can I do? Like, what can I do? So I decided to get in the car and take the 2.5 hour drive up to Flag Is Up Farms, which is Monty Roberts' place, which was up the coast. I know that his farm is open to people visiting, and it's a beautiful drive. And I was like, I'm just going to do that. So I did. I went up there. Walked around, again, petting some noses, and I came back. And that night, I co-produced a documentary with friends called American Street Kid, which is about homeless youth in the U.S. And we had a nonprofit that came out of that called Spare Some Change. And our nonprofit was being featured at like a band showcase downtown. So we were going to be the nonprofit in the entryway with our stuff and our little table. And it was me and my friend, who was one of the producers, Michelle Kaufer. So Michelle and I are sitting at the table that night. She's like, hey, what'd you do today? I said, well, took this drive up to see these horses because, I really want to get involved in this equine assisted coaching and stuff. And I don't know how, I don't know how that's going to happen. And she's like, wait a minute. I think I know somebody that does that. Well, that somebody that she thought she knew was Katie Nelligan. Now, I don't know if you've ever heard of Katie Nelligan, but she's been on Warwick's podcast. The reason Michelle knew her is because Katie Nelligan used to work in marketing at Lionsgate Films. Katie Nelligan had left Lionsgate to start doing equine assisted therapy, learning, coaching. And so Michelle hooks me up with Katie. Katie is her whole setup is 25 minutes from my house. We decide to meet. I took some workshops with Katie. Katie introduced me to Asta Bernstein, who runs Sapphire Sanctuary at the time. And so I started volunteering because I was like, I need to immerse myself in horses. I don't know anything about body language of horses. I don't know anything about the care of horses. So I volunteered at Sapphire. Fast forward, 8 months. And the property that Sapphire was running out of is in foreclosure. All the horses need to go. And I adopt one of the horses. Sapphire they just ran their operation out of this property. They didn't own it, so they just moved their operation, but I took on one of the horses that the property had owned. Fun fact, that property was so depressing. It had people living out of cars on it. It was just a mess. Sad horses. That's the property I live in now. That property, if you had told me in 2016 that I would live there one day, I would ask how much you hate me. Because the joke was there's not enough sage in the world to clear the energy out of that place. But the land is, people talk about, they come here and they feel it. They feel there's a spiritual aspect to this little tiny corner that I'm in. And so when it got foreclosed on, a construction company took it, they gutted everything, they cleaned everything out. And eventually, amazingly enough, here I am. But I learned about horse care through Asta. She was my mentor. And then over time, I got other mentors and learned from more people, and more people found Warwick Schiller. And that's why I said, I can't ever imagine. I don't think if I'm in horses for 30 more years that I'll ever consider myself an expert in horses, because it's so humbling. Like, no matter how much I feel like I learn, there is a sea of knowledge that
and that's all of us. There's a really good quote from the great 18th century classical dressage master François Robichon de la Guérinière. He wrote, what? École de la Cavalerie, which is basically, if you do dressage today, that's what you're trying to do. And he was the keeper of the royal stables for the French king in the early 18th century. And he was approached by a nobleman to train his son. And the nobleman said to La Guérinière, turn him into a good horseman. He doesn't have to be like, a total écuyer, as you'd say, like a total expert. He just, they can sort of show the horse where to put his feet, And La Guérinière said, yeah, the very same thing I myself have been trying to do this past 60 years.
I love it.
So no, we're all, constant beginners. All right, here you are now on this amazing property. What do you call it?
Raven Sun Ranch.
Raven Sun Ranch, and it's in?
It's in Lakeview Terrace, California. So I'm kind of, nobody knows where Lakeview Terrace is, but Burbank is not far. So it's
Okay.
in the East Valley in the
Okay.
foothills.
So it's sort of in that hilly bit that isn't the Hollywood Hills, but it isn't the valley, but sort of is that bit where they do actually quite a lot of filming.
Actually, Patrick Swayze, his place used
Yeah.
to be a couple blocks away.
Yeah,
So
I sort of know a little bit where you're talking about. It's a sort of a little hidden gem there. Okay. You also mentioned this film, American Street Kid, which I've just been looking up as you've been talking. Impressive. You don't make a film like that, get involved in a project like that without some sort of life experience. So now I want to dial the listeners right back. Okay. Now I want the buyer. Where are you born? You talked about, I was in this shitty relationship and, I'm a client with horses walking up and down breezeways of barns to feel better, which is a great thing for people like us to hear, because I think we can forget sometimes as practitioners of the equine stuff that simply being around the horses is healing. We all know this, of course, but we get, for the best of reasons, tied up with trying to provide the service that we provide. And sometimes we forget, actually, it's just, sometimes enough. Letting the horses do their thing just by being who they are. But okay, that shitty relationship that you're talking about, I think you're talking about how people survive relationships. I know that you're being rather modest about shit you've had to go through in order to reach the point where you can help other people going through their shit, basically. Can you just talk through whatever you feel to talk through that help? Because again, a lot of us that are coming into this equine assisted world, we're coming from vastly different backgrounds. And of course, you can't be a human being alive on planet Earth for more than a certain amount of time without going through some trauma. It's just part and parcel of the experience of being on the planet. However, certain types can be more acute than others. So talk us through where you begin and then bring us up to now, and then why hypnotherapy? And then we haven't touched at all on the eye stuff. And that, listeners, is how I really connected with Christine. She did her eye thing, which she's going to tell us about with me, and it healed some stuff in me that needed healing. Bring us, please, from where you start up to now, through all that, please, and then perhaps how it now informs what you do with the horses.
Sure, I'll try not to turn this into a boring recount of my childhood. We'll hit on the highlights.
That's
highlight reel.
Board, yeah. Okay.
Where I was born was in Cleveland, Ohio, but that's just, my mom was a hippie and my father was just getting out of the Vietnam War. But there's a lot of addiction, a lot of alcoholism in my family. And what I've learned as an adult, there was a lot more mental health issues than I realized, because that was my normal. I didn't have anything to compare my growing up to a quote unquote healthy growing up. So this has been an ongoing discovery for myself. But my mother just was not healthy enough to raise a child. So my grandmother, through court order, took me from her when I was 2.5, due to neglect and other issues. So I kind of grew up really knowing what it's like to feel like you don't really have a place of belonging. My grandmother did her best, and she was wonderful. I am grateful to her every day. But, I wanted to be in a family with other kids and siblings and young parents who did fun things. And I did get some of that by going to my aunt's in summers and holidays. But I think that there was a fear of the adults in my life of would I turn out to be like my mother? Because as I grew up, my mother's mental health issues and her manipulation and violence and chaos just grew. And she kept having children. Uh, there's 5 of us with 5 different fathers.
Yeah.
So it was, always managing the train wreck that my mother was creating. So fast forward to when I lived with my aunt in my freshman year and halfway into my sophomore year. And, to protect people in my family, I won't go into exactly what happened, but there was a series of events that happened and lies told that cast me into a view of looking like I was, you're just like your mother. I got thrown out of their house, ended up at my grandmother's. My mother at the same time found herself homeless and was living at my grandmother's, pregnant with my sister Katie and with my young sister Demi, being about, I guess she was probably like 5 or 6. And so the idea was I was going to live with my mother. So I get moved in with my mother, and I'll just fast forward to after my sister was born. A few months later, my mother was itching to get back to the bar, wanted a drinking buddy, didn't want to go alone. So she would leave my little sisters with a neighbor and take me to biker bars when I was 15, 16, around that age. And I mean, it's when I talk about this stuff, I have to tell you, it's like I'm talking about a movie I saw because it's so bizarre to me how much happened in such a small period of time and how absolutely insane it was. By bringing me to these biker bars, I mean, I had guns put in my face. I was in high-speed chases. I was in vans with strange men. Like, my mother would leave me with strange men. The fact that nothing terrible happened to me is, I swear I have guardian angels watching over me because the situations I was put in and that the fact that that stuff didn't happen is just insane. But when you have a young teenager who is living in this chaos, who is defiant, I was very defiant. I was very angry about a lot of things. And I never had a father. And I meet this older man who thinks I am just the best thing since sliced bread and takes me under his wing. And I fell madly in love with him. I was 16. He was 34. And, I haven't shared this before, but the first time I ever did a drug other than smoking weed, which I hated because it just made me paranoid, I didn't get the attraction, was with my mother. My mother and the group of people that she associated with were into snorting meth. And so that was given to me when I was about, I think I was 16. This is around the time I met my kid's dad. And so I would go off on weekends with him and we would do meth. And I just was enamored with him. I followed him off the ends of the earth. Like, he was my God in a way. He was everything. And the fact that he was scary on some really primitive level, because I felt so hurt by the rejection of my family and the people that I loved and the position I was in, that I think on some level, the scariness of him made me feel safe, because he was strong and nobody was going to hurt me if I was with him. And one day when we had been away, we would go on these like drives, and I never knew what he was doing. We'd get a hotel somewhere. I'd be left at the hotel. He would go and visit people or do whatever he did, or I'd sit in the car outside of people's houses. We're driving back. He's crashing next to me. So he's like nodding off. I was doing the driving, but I didn't have a driver's license. And we got pulled over. And yeah, turns out there was 5 pounds of meth in the trunk. And that caused a complete jumping of tracks for my life. I was a juvenile, so I went to juvenile hall, and I didn't even know why I was there. I didn't know there was anything that I didn't know why. I thought the reason I was held was because when my mother was mad at me, she had reported me as a runaway because she didn't want me to go away with him for a weekend. And so she never took that off. So I thought I was being arrested because I was still on the books as a runaway. When I figured this out, I didn't know what to think. I was more dependent on him now because this was his world. He had been arrested a million times before, and I needed him now to help me. And it kind of forged me in this relationship. And when the government was going to move to certify me as an adult, we went on the run. And I lived for 4.5 years under aliases and moving, and had 2 kids under aliases. And during that time, he became addicted to drugs and became more and more terrifying and abusive. And I felt I had nowhere to go because if I went home, I would be arrested. And my family didn't either have the money or the knowledge of how to navigate the judicial system in this country. And during this time, he was actually going back and showing up for his cases because the search was like an illegal search and seizure. So he ended up winning the case after 4.5 years on the fact that they didn't have a warrant to search the car. They did a lot of things because they knew who he was. So, my family found out, no, I'm jumping. So he wins the case. I had spent from 18 to 22 and a half with, no friends, no life, just on hold waiting, and then living with this really unpredictable human. And so I was so excited to move home. And so we did. I kind of took him dragging and streaming because I was moving back. I was going to have a life. And what we didn't know was that 5 pounds of meth in the trunk is also a federal offense. So even though he had won his state case, the feds had charged him in a sealed indictment, which meant that when we moved back, we were being surveilled for a year, followed in airplanes and helicopters and all kinds of crazy stuff, phones tapped, all of that. And one day there was a knock on the door, and it was the police. And all of a sudden, agents came out from the woods. They came out from behind the barn. They came out from everywhere. And I was on the 11 o'clock news. That's how my family knew. So it was a huge bust. Huge bust. And
what were they busting you for at that point? Because the 5 pounds of meth was years before.
Well, it was still that charge. So there's so much to the story that when I try to whittle it down, I can miss key pieces. So because the 5 pounds of meth was also a federal offense, it's like new charges. Even though he won those state charges, now he's facing the same, we're both facing the same charges. same exact crime, but now from a federal level. But they had also surveilled him. And during those 4.5 years that we were living on the run, he was actually manufacturing meth
I
in
see.
order to finance us to live. And he had friends and people he knew that were turned against him because they had got caught for other things. So there was informants.
So this is Breaking Bad, basically.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
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 And I think he became addicted because when you make meth in its liquid form, when you're making it, it will go right through the skin.
Okay.
And because he didn't wear gloves, he was constantly getting it, and then would want more, and then start doing. It was a process. So, but things were even though we had moved back, and even though he was, yeah, it was really bad. So I remember they drove us down. I got driven down to the Philadelphia. They call it PIC. It's the county jail. And there were 5 wards and 80 women on a ward. And all the women in there thought I was in there for DUI because they had no idea why this, 23-year-old girl that looks like she's 15 is doing in jail. And then they saw the news. And when I woke up, I remember the first day waking up in there. And the craziest thing was that other than my children who were staying with friends, other than that, I felt like I had been saved. Like the thought was, it's finally over. Because I didn't think I would ever be able to leave him. I don't know how I would ever get away. He was terrifying. And there was lots of threats. So I was free. I was in jail and I was free. And so it took 15 months. I had to plead guilty to 20-something felonies. But he agreed to plead guilty to get me out.
So he did the decent thing.
Absolutely. Yeah. He pled guilty, got 10 years to get me out and back to our children. Yes, he did.
But ultimately, despite the threats, despite all that, when
Well, that's the thing.
push came to shove,
That's the thing, Rupert.
Interesting.
That's it. That this is what makes people stay in relationships sometimes too, is because people aren't all bad.
Yeah, sure.
Right? So we cling on to these aspects, these crumbs or these pieces that we go, well, these don't add up. Like, this is a stand-up person, right? But yet, they're my biggest threat.
Did he subsequently reverse and then come and become a threat again? Or from that point on, was he always kind of on your side?
He wanted to maintain control over me.
Okay.
From jail through.
So it wasn't completely clean.
Yeah. So,
yeah.
Which then started me having to move a lot and feeling like I was being sought after.
So you sort of had to go on the run again.
Yeah. Yeah.
And how long did that last?
Years. What was interesting is that I sometimes would question whether I was just being paranoid. But, he had put that paranoia in me too. He had told me one time that if certain bad people knew or believed and thought that I knew how to make meth, that they would kidnap me in order to get that information. So, and there was a lot of people that were his friends that were not happy that he pled guilty and that I got out. And I found out years later that there were places that I had left and moved, and within weeks they had tracked me down to those places. Now, whether or not there was nefarious intent or it was just about getting me back to bringing the kids, I just didn't really want to be bringing my kids to prisons all the time for visits. And there was a lot of racism and horrible views that I didn't want them exposed to as young children. If they get exposed to that as young adults, they already have the framework. But I didn't want that for them.
What became of this person in the end?
Oh, yeah. So I wish I could say that was the last bad relationship I had, but I had to do it again just to be sure. But in probably like 2005, I'm thinking, he tracked me down. He got out of jail, and his girlfriend was like kind of like super hacker, internet genius. And anyway, she tracked me down. She had like Google aerial views of the house I was in, and he convinced his daughter, who I always loved very much. He had 4 children before we were together, and his daughter was coming out to California with her fiance, and he convinced her to come and reconnect with me. So that was a trippy day, within minutes to be on the phone with him after not talking to him for years and years. But I don't think he ever really got over his propensity for math. And I think he was probably still doing it. In 2015, he died of a heart attack.
Did you feel a great sense of relief? And did that make you feel guilty?
I didn't feel relief, to be honest with you, because I had already reclaimed my life. He didn't hold any kind of fear for me. I felt sadness for my children who had been trying their best to have some form of relationship with him. He ended up spending more than 10 years in jail, and nobody goes through that without having it affect them in very deep ways. He was unable to be present at all. He talked at you more than to you. They had a really hard time connecting with him to have some kind of idea of who their father was. And it was very hard on them when he died. Not because there was a great love there, but because of the loss of what could have been.
Mm.
And I just felt sadness because of the choices he made. He could have had so much more love in his life and such a better impact. But, there's an aspect of him that knew that he wasn't well. And, that it was probably good that he wasn't around the kids when he was young, when they were young.
You're a young mother. You have your kids on the run. Then you're arrested and you're in jail for 15 months while your children are very small.
Mm-hmm.
How did you survive that? That's enough to take one down. Talk us through the survival process of that.
I had never been away from my children. I don't think I had ever spent one night away from them. We were very close. And when things like this happen, like with any disaster or the natural disaster, everything slows down and you just do what you need to do in the moment. And you don't have time or the luxury to think about the future or what, And so I think that once they were picked up from the police station, my job was to not fall apart in front of them, and then I could fall apart when they left.
Mm.
And I'll never forget the first conversation I had with my daughter, because she was 4 or 3. Was she? No, 2.5. So it was a couple months before her 4th birthday. And the first phone call I had with her took a few days to get to, but she was hysterical. And she was saying, "Come get me, Mommy, come get me." And I broke.
Mm.
My knees buckled, and there was nothing I could do.
Mhm.
The only thing that I could do was manage their care as best I could from where I was.
How did you do that? Where were they?
So, you know, it wasn't perfect. They were at first at their dad's ex, their half-sister brother, or their half-brother and half-sister's house. But there wasn't really a parent in that house during the day. It was like the teenage kids, and it wasn't I'm hugely grateful because every other woman that was in there with me, their kids were taken into foster care.
Right, that was
So
going to be my question. How come they weren't taken as wards of the state?
because I had someone that could come get them, and because, to be honest with you, it really could have been because I was white.
Mm.
Really. I mean, to think that doesn't play into things would be, you know, ignorant. The other women that I was in jail, that were in jail with me, the women in the federal system were almost all Latino. And a lot of them didn't speak English. And their kids were taken into foster care. I don't know if it's because they didn't have representation, if they didn't have people that they could go with. I don't know. I did have a lawyer pretty quickly. But they ended up with them, and then I had to get them out of there because it wasn't a good place. And they ended up going to a friend of my ex's we had visited before, and they had a house and a pool and kids. And from my perspective, it was a stable home. She stayed home and took care of the kids. He worked. It turned out to not be as good of an environment as I had hoped, but other people that were trying to step up were only willing to take one child, and I was not separating them. So the options weren't great, but they were the best that I could get, and they could have been much worse. But that's I've lived. One of the things that I think is so important when you have something like this happen in a family is to take responsibility for your role and to not be defensive. I've always tried to raise my children with the understanding that their experience is their experience, and that, we could talk about how I was 16 when I met him, but I still hold accountability for what happened. And if they're ever upset with me or frustrated or sad, that's their right. And I don't defend myself. I'm not here to change their mind. I'm here to allow their experience to be their experience. And because of that, we don't have an elephant in the room. They don't feel that they can't tell me how they feel because somehow it'll hurt me so much I won't be able to take it.
Yeah.
So they hold it all in.
Thank you. When somebody shares a story that like the one that you've just shared, it gives everybody else permission to have lived their lives too, if that makes sense. You create healing by sharing that. And what it also does, I think, for, those of us who are working in the fields of mental health is you don't know who's walking through the door and you don't know what fires they have to put out in their lives. All you can do is let the horses do what they do. And one cannot presume as a human it's so interesting, isn't it? We're all empathetic to each other. We're social creatures. We are basically empathetic to each other, thank God. But there's a limit to what we can offer each other for healing because of our own fires and egos and so on. The horse doesn't come with that. Mm-hmm. But by sharing a story like that, you come very, very close to the role that the horse does, which is you're saying, here I am, having lived this experience. This allows you to be human too. I know that's not necessarily what you're consciously saying, but I think it's how it gets received. And I think that this brings a very similar kind of healing to the type of healing a horse would bring or nature would bring. So for that, I'm extremely grateful. And I can see why somebody coming to your barn, this being the point of it sort of doesn't matter that your equine experience might be somewhat recent. With the type of experience that you've had in life, you are very well set up to help people. Now, you then go from this experience and some others into therapeutic modalities, I presume to some degree to help yourself out too.
Yeah.
And you find yourself with hypnotherapy, and then you find your way to IEMT. Please talk to us about why and tell us what they do.
Yes. I do want to say one thing first, because I realize you asked me a question that I never answered.
Okay.
Or never fully answered, and which was around the idea of what would I want to share with people who are doing the equine work. And I think the biggest thing I see, and it doesn't matter how many degrees you have or what initials are behind your name, I see this happen a lot. And this is where, as any type of mental health work or any type of supportive work for people, is so important to really, really develop a sense of when we're projecting onto people. Because if we allow ourselves to do that, we're going to get it wrong at some point.
Mm. And
the way I see this happen is there's two ways in my experience. One is my mother was something I survived. And how beautiful is it that there are people in this world that can't even comprehend that. And there's people in this world that get very uncomfortable if you say anything negative about your mother, if you tell people that you have had to limit your exposure to your mother. They can't understand. And I have had that happen with people who were doing, quote unquote, like horse therapy type work, where they projected onto me this idea that my family were my ancestors and they were part of me, and I had to be grateful for them, and it was not very informed, put it that way. And I think that I've heard of this struggle with other people who have had parents that are so toxic that sometimes no contact is the only way to protect yourself. And people don't understand, and it gets people very uncomfortable. So being able to see how we don't project that in our work is important. The other one is when you've been in a pathological love relationship or even pathological relationship as an adult child with a parent, there can be really unhealthy things that happen. One of the things is that the way pathological relations work is very similar to horse training, or at least the older model of horse training that is shifting, which is the idea of pressure and release. Pathological relationships become a pressure and release modality, which means that the uncomfortableness or the anger or the manipulation that's trying to happen from the person with the pathological issue becomes a pressure that the only way we feel safe is that we have to relieve that pressure. That could mean paying their bills. It could mean agreeing to not see our friends. It could mean a bunch of things. And those don't necessarily go away when you separate from that person, because it's a power that you're trying to wield. And for a long time, mental health professionals did not understand the dynamic. And they would further shame the person who was being manipulated because they're going, wait a minute, I don't understand. You're not even together anymore. You're not even together anymore. And you just paid their car payment for them. Like, what are you talking about? The person already feels shame for the fact that they did it. But the threat of not doing it and the pressure of being able to resist all of the manipulation and all the ways that that person has shown you that they will burn it to the ground if you do not comply. Well, then it's a choice that's not really, doesn't feel like a choice. Do I want to die on this hill? Do I want to invite this in? It takes time. And sometimes those are the relationships, like these are not clear cut. These types of relationships are ones that people do, that women do get killed. That people will say in abusive relationships, oh, why didn't you just leave? Or when you read about women who poisoned or ultimately killed their abuser, and they'll go, why didn't they just leave? They could have just left. And what they don't understand is, and this isn't just to women, this is men too. Men are in these relationships as well, is that the point to which you are most vulnerable is when you decide to leave. Because you have started to demonstrate that you're no longer under the spell, and you've connected to the fact that you have power. And that's the thing that has been it has been the whole MO, is for you to never believe that you have agency. And so when you start to believe that, that needs to be taken down. And when you take that action is when the big retaliations can happen. So it's not true that people can just walk out, and people don't have the support that it just doesn't exist in a lot of ways. So this is the one thing I wanted to say about the people that show up, because a lot of times people who are in these relationships will show up for help. And you have to be careful of what help that you're suggesting, because if you don't know the actual situation and you suggest someone leave it without proper support, which is going to definitely go beyond your skill set, they could be getting into a more dangerous situation. And this is a type of brainwashing that takes years to undo. It's not intellectual. They already know they're being manipulated. They know that things don't add up and that they're stuck. They just don't know how to get out of it, because it's a grind. You got ground down. So that is something that I feel very passionate about, and that I would say anybody, any other person doing this work that has any questions, if I would be happy to answer.
Well, this is going to be at the end of this. I'm sure and I'm sure a lot of people listening would say, can we come to you for mentorship? Because without a doubt, there are people who are facing this. And as you say, it's male and female. As you say, it's all walks of life. As you say, it's, and I don't think there are many people with the skill set that you have who can advise on these things like you can. So we will get there. There will be, so listeners, there will be a contact that you can go to, Christine, and get further mentorship on this. Talk to us about the hypnotherapy now, and talk to us about the IEMT, please. And then how does that inform recovery?
Sure. So hypnotherapy, we talked about the 88% being the subconscious, and that's where our programming is. The ways of seeing ourselves and the world that, let's say, we didn't consciously choose. They were, downloaded into us as children, and society, all of these things. So the beauty of hypnotherapy is that you get access to that subconscious programming. So you can start to make suggestions into the subconscious mind to create knowns in the subconscious that will support your conscious decisions. So if I want to like working out, if I want to start working out, well, it's going to be helpful to have some suggestions made to the subconscious that connect you to the feelings, the feelings of after a workout, the feelings of why I want to do this, what I'm reaching for health-wise or body-wise. I'm feeling strong, or what I'll be able to do and how I'll be able to support my body, versus the pain being the forefront thought of the actual working out, of how we don't want to do it, or it's boring, or it's this, or it's that. So it's kind of like, eating foods that you don't want to eat is very similar. Sweets and stuff like that is very similar to drinking alcohol, because we want that positive feeling that we get right in the beginning. And our mind completely gaslights us about what the effect is afterwards. It just doesn't even show it to us. Don't think about what's afterwards. Let's just focus on that initial feeling. And then after we do, it's like we wake up and go, now we're dealing with the after effects. And it's like, I was like under a trance before. So
well, dopamine is a strong thing, right? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So that's just a little aspect of hypnotherapy. IEMT, I've been exposed to a ton of other modalities.
What does IEMT stand for?
It's integral eye movement therapy, or integral eye movement technique. So
how does it work?
How it works is our mind's body. Wow. Our mind's first and foremost goal is to keep us alive.
I love our mind's body.
And our mind's body. It was almost like
our mind does think of our body as its property. Yeah, it's very interesting. I think, yeah. So, sorry.
Now, the interesting thing is that because it wants to keep us alive, it wants us to avoid pain, because logically, pain can lead to death. But the mind doesn't differentiate between physical and emotional pain. Pain is pain, and pain needs to be avoided. So the way I see it is that if you know anything about internal family systems, or IFS, the premise is that when we're a kid, this almost internal family gets formed in our minds. And the predominant role is the manager. And this is what it looks like. I'm a little kid. I'm 3 years old. I'm wide open, right? I'm wide open. Hey, I don't have any defenses. I don't have any protections up yet. And I find a frog in the backyard, and I'm so excited. And I take my frog in the house, and I'm like, Mom, wait, look at my frog. I found it. And she's like, I told you to get out of here. I'm in the middle of something. Why are you such a pain in the ass all the time? Get outside and play. Well, all of that openness, that is like a collapse. It's a collapse. It is a deep, deep wound. And in that moment, a manager gets formed. Because we don't want to feel that pain ever again. And the manager goes, stupid, look what you did, stupid. Don't do that again. Just play with yourself. You don't need anybody else. And that manager, from that point on, is always looking for ways that that stupid part of you is going to be open and get hurt again. And that part of you that got hurt becomes what they call the exile, and it gets put in a box and it gets thrown in the dungeon. And it is exile. We cannot trust that part of you. And as we all know, children learn how to regulate their nervous system through co-regulation. And when you don't have a parent that you can go to when either you're super happy or super sad or super scared, that will hold you and listen to you and let you use their nervous system to bring yourself back down. And you go, well, I'm just going to have to do it for myself. You can't do co-regulation for yourself. But what you can do is you can dissociate. And that starts to feel like a superpower. And you become more and more intellectual, and you intellectualize things, and you go, that doesn't hurt me. Yeah, I don't get bothered by that stuff. It's not that you don't, it's that you have dulled that to the point where when it comes in, it's so automatic that that gets put in a box and put away that you never even experience. You bypass the whole experience. So we all have all these managers, right? So this is how I describe IEMT. So now when that happened, right? Let's imagine that what you heard that manager is saying is that nobody wants to hear from you. That creates kind of a tuning fork within your psyche. It's like a lens. Every situation after that point is going to be scanning for how no one wants to hear from you. If someone that you know just says, hey, what's up? And just walks past you and keeps going, it's not that they're busy. It's that they're avoiding you because nobody wants to hear from you. Right? We go into every situation with this anxiety that nobody wants to hear from me. Every situation we see goes to that lens and validates. So now this memory that created the manager, well, the mind kept that memory as being sharp. So what I mean by that is the memory lives in the hippocampus, right? But it has a direct link right into the amygdala, which is the nervous system, the body. So mind and body are connected in that memory. You cannot intellectualize your way out of the effects of that memory.
Yeah, there's going to be cortisol. Yeah.
Yeah, it's connected. So what IEMT does is it's simplistic in its approach. And the whole goal is to dial down or disconnect that connection between the hippocampus and the amygdala. And the beauty of this is that when you take the negative charge away from that past memory, you get to now have perspective on the memory because you're not activated. When we're activated, our wise mind, our ability to have perspective and to see it from the bigger picture is almost non-existent because we're activated. Take away the activation, we can use our own wisdom and our own views to put perspective on something that felt like it was so triggering. And now, oh, wow, yeah. God, my mom was doing that to all of us all the time. She was so stressed out, and I know what was going on then. And yeah, I can see, like you just start to see it differently. And then all of those the domino effect of everything that you built on top of that, that all starts to fall away. And this works amazingly because you know what? The thing is that this whole system was created in our evolution to help us as children when we're in an environment to survive. The adaptive child needs to adapt and survive the environment. But those tools that it created do not necessarily serve us as adults when we have agency. You can keep the wisdom of a past experience without needing the charge. So let's say you, like, to apply this to horses, let's say you had a accident on a horse, you were riding your horses and then you have this terrible accident and you got really hurt. Or sometimes you didn't even have to get really hurt. Sometimes people have small accidents.
Yeah,
but
the amygdala
because-
doesn't care that
Yeah.
threat is real or imagined. It's going to produce
It's
cortisol.
right.
Yeah.
And then now you have anxiety about riding. But then you have anxiety about having anxiety because anxiety leads to more crashes and more issues. So, and then you're trying to force yourself to not be anxious or pretend that you're not anxious. And then you have shame around that, or you feel bad about that. And so being able to take away the charge is just this, it's an opening. It creates an opening for these charges to leave and the wisdom and perspective to come in.
How do you bring that into work with horses and people? Are you doing this work with the rapid eye movement, following your finger, etc., while they're working with the horse or on the horse, or you're doing this away from the horse in another context, but it's the same client and you're offering an equine and a non-equine thing within your practice?
Yes. And I will say that the majority of my clients, we don't have the equine part because they're virtual. They live all over the place. The only people
you could do this over Zoom.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Do you hear that, everyone? Okay.
Yeah. Most of my work is done through Zoom. That's why also that I say like the equine part isn't as big of a role because I can only offer it to the people that are in my area. Or I do weekend intensives one-on-one. So people will come and stay with me for a weekend and they will work with the horses. But
okay. I'm just thinking I can imagine doing this on a horse. I'm just now imagining being on a horse in a nice situation with a nice horse, with the horse moving nicely underneath me, or perhaps the horse being static and peaceful underneath me. And you taking me through this rapid eye movement way to remove the hippocampus amygdala connection. And if I am someone who likes that environment, horses, perhaps I also maybe like to do it under a tree. Perhaps I also maybe like to do it in water. Perhaps, people have their different happy places. But obviously for we horse people, that's ponies. I could see a double power because I could see a subconscious reaction going, oh, well, I'm being listened to because I've been placed in even if it's by myself, in the environment that is the best for me, sensorily, emotionally, and so on. So I could see a real power in doing this with the horse, but I could also see what's great is that you could also do this completely without, because you're not always with the horse. And as you say, you can do this over distance. What it seems that you're describing here is a shamanic process. So when I've had the experience with shamans in indigenous cultures, it's usually conflict resolution, and that conflict is often internal, but it can be also external. So the shaman could be addressing conflict within the group, for example, conflict between two people. But equally, it's conflict, if there's a health issue, that's still a conflict, it's still a dilemma. And the idea is to resolve that dilemma. And I think that one of the things which is tricky for us, all of us in our culture, and by our culture, I don't just mean Europe and America, I mean everything that is post-agricultural in the world and is not hunter-gatherer, basically. Anything that has gone through this process of kind of becoming processed in a funny way. Removal from nature, which is also a deep wound, is we cannot be other than mentally ill in that situation, so therefore we must all be, because we're all suffering, we're all animals in a cage. And sometimes the cage is nicer than the other cages, but it's still a cage. And we lack community and we lack the good shaman, but we also have gone from the predator being, or the danger being, obviously the lion, the tiger, the whatever, but also say the elephant or the black mamba, but not in the hunter-gatherer culture, your fellow human. And even though humans are as funky in hunter-gatherer life as they are in non-hunter-gatherer, there is a process to defunkify and keep those conflicts cleansed so that the community doesn't fragment and people don't get eaten by hyenas, basically. Now we've replaced the hyena with ourselves. Mm-hmm. And this sends us mad because it's not how it's supposed to be. And yet we have to navigate this. And it's almost impossible. It seems to me that what you're describing, particularly with IEMT, is a way to, in our society, have that shamanic conflict resolving, cleansing reboot that allows you to navigate. And that sounds incredibly useful. What I can also say is, having tried it with you, because remember in Birmingham, I was like, all right, then do it. And you did take me through, and I was like, oh, that did actually take the sting out of that memory. That's crazy. That's amazing. And it was.
And then you overslept.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. Yeah. It's like, then I slept like I hadn't slept in, I don't know. But so if people are coming into equine assisted work, would you recommend? Because I think this is something anyone can learn, right? IEMT. Would you recommend that as a modality that those of us who are working with mental health should, in whatever field, should look at? And do you teach it?
So here's the funny thing about IEMT is that when it was first shown to me, I mean, I was laughing because I was like, what did you just do? Like, that's crazy. And I was like, I have to learn this. And so because it worked so clearly for me and it worked so easily for you, I had this vision of like getting trained in it as being super easy. Like that was really easy. That was really straightforward. It is not.
Okay, yeah, I can believe it.
Easy.
Damn.
Because that's when everything goes right. But remember, we all have those managers. And let me tell you something. I've been working with someone where I'm looking dead in the face of their managers, and their managers are going, oh, she thinks that we're going to let her let this go. That's hilarious. I don't know what you think you come here to do, lady, but there's no way you're getting past us. Like you have to have all of the different ways that this can go and know how to navigate through to find ways around these things, because I've had it go all different directions. So because it was easy, like for me, as with you and really direct, I thought, oh, it's just going to be learning about the questions and how to move people's eyes, and that'll be it. But it's not to say that if you do this work, that as you've done it as a client, that you can't take aspects of it and do it for yourself. And if you don't get the result, like you're not going to hurt yourself. If you don't get the result that you're looking for, then you would know that you maybe need some extra help on that. But yes, I think that once you experience it a few times, or maybe more than a few, but like then you can get a feel for it and use it. Yeah.
Okay. Also, maybe you could, let's say you're an equine practitioner, you're listening to this, you're thinking, well, I like the sound of this, but I haven't got the time to, I've got to feed all my horses and I haven't got the time to go and learn this modality, which Christine has just divulged is perhaps a little bit trickier to learn than we were hoping, like everything. But perhaps I could team up with someone who has who has learned that modality, and then perhaps we could join forces within the practice to have that. So let's say, obviously I'm in Germany, you're in California, but let's say you were down the road from me. I could see saying, okay, Christine, could we join forces here? I'm doing this thing. This is this horseboy thing. This is this movement method thing. This is this Dickson thing. Can I please send clients to you, or could you come sometimes in certain sessions with certain people and bring that resource to the table? Is it easy to find people who are trained like you are in this?
It started in the UK. And so there's a lot more practitioners in the UK.
Okay.
It's really only recently starting to get more and more traction in the US. I think right now I'm one of two listed practitioners in Los Angeles, the other one being my daughter.
Okay. I thought it was more widespread.
Yeah, no, but it's really, as you saw, like, with your own experience, it's really getting traction now, and people are seeking it out because it works.
So someone could say, IEMT practitioners or therapists near me.
Yeah, because once you get your certification, you're listed on the website, and so you can put yes. Like I actually had a client on Saturday who found me through reading about IEMT on Reddit, and then Googled IEMT practitioners in Los Angeles, and I came up, and that's how she found me. So yes.
Good.
And you have a lot of really good questions about doing stuff more with the horses, right? These are all ways that, who knows if that, it doesn't, you don't have to have the horses, because this is an inside job. This is all about how your mind and body are connected, but who knows ways that it could be expanded through actually being in the field with the horses, or there's so many different things that you could try. Nan Zintmeister and I, we have been planning, we were going to do it this year, but now we're doing it next year, is a retreat where I'm kind of on the human realm and she's working on the horse realm. And by pairing up, we get to support people in the work that they're doing. They want to do the work with the horses, but we all know our own personal work is just completely interwoven with that. So not only the mentoring stuff and the other stuff, but if we come up against something that is rooted in that nervous system from a past memory, we could clear it out in real time. And then what the people are there to learn about the horses doesn't have the roadblocks from the internal barriers anymore. Like everything can actually sink in and be more accessible.
I think we need to try this. Okay, so listeners, with your permission, Christine, should we decide to do this and invite people to come on a retreat like this or a workshop? Let's do the horse side. Let's do this side. I can't do this side, but you can do this side. And let's see what happens. Why don't we do one stateside and one? I'd be intrigued to see what people come away with. And maybe this would be something for professionals, that coming from whatever side of the equine assisted field to be exposed to this. Something which we didn't get into, we haven't got time to get into it now because I think maybe we need to have you on again, is I know that you've done a lot of work with addiction, people with addiction, celebrities with addiction. I know that you ended up building a large practice that's had to, you've had to protect people's anonymities. You've worked sort of at that level a bit in Hollywood, and that's given you an insight into how tricky it can be. This is where navigation comes up again, to help people who are in the public sphere and therefore can't, go out there and be frank about what they're facing and what they're dealing with. Just because we're heading towards the sort of natural end of this particular iteration, but I think we would like to have to bring you back on. Can you just talk to us a little bit about how that has helped you, where you have to sort of, in your practice, where you have to help someone, but you also have to kind of keep it secret that you're helping them, that you have to dance around. You're talking about eggshells, that these are very real ones suddenly, where you actually have to protect the people that you're working with, and at the same time, get them through what they're doing. How has those years of doing that helped you to help ordinary people more deeply? Because it just adds a layer of complexity.
It does because, a lot of people who are artists in entertainment are sensitive people. And one of the things that I think that we've seen really explode around social media is that the dehumanizing of others and the fact that celebrities, we would talk about and weigh in on a celebrity's life in ways that we would never do to someone that we knew or someone face. Like it's just like,
That's projection again.
yeah, it's very bizarre social experiment that's really but it has real life consequences. Depression, suicide, and addiction being some of the ways that people end up succumbing to this mass feeling energetically that you are despised or ridiculous or shameful, untalented, whatever it is. And, I don't even pretend that I know what that's like, but I can say that when I did go through the arrest and was on the news and all of that stuff and sitting in the courtroom and in a bail hearing, the prosecution can say anything about you without backing it up with any kind of fact. It's they can use hearsay or anything like that. And so the things that they said were horrifying to me. I wasn't prepared. I didn't know any of that. And it felt like, and this was in the news and everything, it felt like you were hated by the world and you were being seen in a way that was not even true. And it's a very trippy feeling to have this like unknown, like faceless enormity that now suddenly sees you, has honed in on you, and is projecting this negative energy towards you. So, there's a difference when you're dealing with someone who is a public figure in any way, because in addiction, you talk about, there's a saying that says you're only as sick as your secrets. So there's an aspect of ownership of being true that goes with healing, but I can't tell someone else whether that's what their experience is going to be if they come out to the world and share this aspect with them, because it doesn't look like a lot of that is always true. Now, a lot of people who have done this have found that the amount of support they got way outweighed the negative comments. But this is more about navigating this internally and finding the forgiveness and finding the freedom, and knowing that that is your decision. I'm not sure if I answered that fully because I kind of just lost my train.
Well, it sounds like what it gives you is compassion and perspective.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. For sure.
And perhaps a greater level of it because you went through it personally, and then you ended up having to help people who were either also going through it personally or in danger of going through it personally. I think what you're talking about here is kindness.
Empathy.
Yeah. It's easy to forget that section, even in this line of work. And God knows, we horsey people can be a bossy, judgmental lot, and it can creep up without even noticing.
I have a theory about that.
Go on.
And my theory is that a lot of children who grew up in dysfunctional homes found solace in animals, but did not learn nervous system regulation, healthy communication, which people never think about learning communication. We just think it's just downloaded to us, but there's actually tools that you could learn to really help your relationships around healthy communication. We didn't learn that. We never felt what it was like to have power or agency. So that feeling of being susceptible to everyone else and everyone else's thoughts comes with us into adulthood, no matter how powerful we actually are. So then our reactions to people are oftentimes overblown. We feel attacked by different opinions, questioning, can feel threatened by someone doing things differently or seeing things differently, judged. It's that thing where we can become very in tune with our own feelings or the feelings that we feel the animal is having, and have a lot less compassion for the other person. How many times you hear people say, I love animals and I hate people. Yet we're people. You're a people. We're all a people. And so either you have a grandiose view of yourself that feels like you're the only good person in the world and everyone else is terrible, or you have internalized a really negative and unhealthy view of yourself as human. And either way, it's you don't have a community. You don't have the beautiful aspects that you can only get from having a relationship with another human being.
Wise words. And yeah, that is a statement you hear so often, and often from people who are supposed bit equine assisted field or canine too. You hear that with dog people too, and so on. And yeah, it does. That one always gives me pause. It's like, well, then why are you doing it? Why are you working with people then? Yeah, deep down we're all searching for, crying for that connection. And we know it's there. We know it's possible. And I wonder if that statement that gets made is a way of, is actually an unconscious statement of grief, when saying, you know, I love animals, but I hate people, meaning I seem to find with animals what I can't find with people, but what I know I ought to be able to find with people because they are my species. And I feel this grief of being unable to connect with my species. And this is a soul wound. And I'm expressing it with these words, even though it's coming out in a weird way. Does that make sense?
It's my sword and shield, you know. I say that those walls that you built to protect yourself also keep you on the other side of everything that you want.
Yeah. Oi, oi, oi. Got to saddle up and go for a contemplative ride in the forest. On my list for tomorrow. Listen, Christine, it's been amazing. I think there's more questions have come up in my mind. And I think, as you know, and some of our listeners know, that we have another podcast called Live Free, Ride Free. And I think I'd like you to please come on that and talk in a more biographical way about how you've managed to kind of self-actualize. From the equine side, I think those of us listening definitely are all very curious about the IEMT. We're very curious about how you bring what you've learned about addiction and also hypnosis and so into perhaps ways we can inform our own practices and to do what we do better. I certainly am always looking for mentorship. How do we find you? How do we reach out to you? How do we engage you to help us learn this stuff?
Yeah, sure. Well, my email address is on the path, C as in cat, H as in horse, T as in Tom, CHT @gmail.com. So it's on the path, CHT @gmail.com. My website is onthepathcoaching.net. And you can find me on social media, Christine Dickson on Facebook. I have an On the Path on Facebook business page. I have
people can reach out to you for mentorship. People can, yeah.
And on Instagram, it's on the path _mentor, and then I have my personal is Christine Dickson _ on the path. But yeah, you can find me. You can message me any way. I mean,
and we're going to put these links in, on the written thing at the end of this too.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm certainly going to be signing up some mentorship. I could use it.
I've had the idea, and maybe it's something that we can talk about too, is the idea of like putting something together for trainers, for people who are working in this. Because look, I'm not saying that people can't be grind. When you see, especially if you identify with the horse's pain and suffering, and then you see people show up with the same ignorance, it's easy to lose your compassion for the person and connect with the feeling of that building on itself instead of connecting with the idea that how great more and more people who believed this way are coming to learn things differently. How great is that? As opposed to, I can't believe another, and that's just one example. Like it really, it's a lot of the way we're viewing things that creates our own suffering.
Yeah. It's a reframing that we have to go through, but one can't do that alone. And one needs, one would have had the shaman, one would have had vision quests, one would have had, those vigils alone on the mountain, that sort of thing. But we don't anymore. So unless we deliberately sit down in some way and create it. Yeah. So absolutely. I think we should put something together for our fellow professionals in the field in a sort of not we're here to teach you stuff, more like a let's explore how we might want to deepen our practices.
Yeah.
Okay. Brilliant.
I love that. Yeah.
To be continued then.
To be continued.
Thank you, Christine.
Thank you so much for inviting me on here. I could talk to you for 10 hours, and maybe take a nap and
Yeah, I think, and editing. And I'm sure, I think most of the listeners would love to hear more from you too. There's a lot more here to explore and unpack. So let's maybe think about a round 2. Until then, I'm grateful, and we see you next time.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you for joining us. We hope you enjoyed today's podcast. Join our website, newtrailslearning.com, to check out our online courses and live workshops in Horseboy Method, Movement Method, and Athena. These evidence-based programs have helped children, veterans, and people dealing with trauma around the world. We also offer a horse training program and self-care program for riders on longridehome.com. These include easy-to-do online courses and tutorials that bring you and your horse joy. For an overview of all shows and programs, go to rupertisaacson.com. See you on the next show. And please remember to press subscribe and share.